Welcome back for another edition of Political Breakfast. Always good to have you here. This is our second dose this week. With me are strategists Tharon Johnson and Brian Robinson, and it's always good to start off on a good note. And APS, Atlanta Public Schools, has something to be very, very proud about when it comes to some fourth graders. And you guys want to say something about that and applaud them as well. Tharon, I'll start with you.
Well, the news came out last week that City of Atlanta Public Schools tops the nation with major fourth grade reading gains. The program is one that is a certain important metrics, a certain important stage in a child's life when they're in the fourth grade with them reading proficiently, but also with math. And I just wanted to congratulate the Atlanta Public School faculty, staff, and teachers. I know many principals over there, but also, Lisa, want to give a huge shout out to the board, which is being led right now by Chairwoman Erica Mitchell, and also their new superintendent, Johnson. This is a man who I've only had a chance to converse with a couple times, but there's an unwavering commitment to children in Atlanta public schools being put in a position to succeed. It's all about growth. It's all about making sure that they are laser-like focused on improving these scores, particularly in math and other subjects. And then lastly, just shout out to all the parents. Parental responsibility is something that Democrats need to talk about even more, because, parents right now went through a lot of dealing with virtual learning during COVID, and every single school system. I have the honor and pleasure of representing Kemp, Metro Atlanta, and you look at their scores, they're improving pretty well. But every single school system across the state took a hit with the post-pandemic sort of readjustments. But just shout out to Atlanta Public Schools and the great work that they're doing.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. And I'd also like to add on, perhaps with a bit of a partisan hat, that Georgia students across the board are recovering from COVID learning loss much faster than the states that kept schools closed for much longer. I think those decisions on the local level, at the state level in Georgia, are paying dividends for our children. Schools should never have been kept closed for as long as they were. Even here, it was a point where it just got to be ridiculous once we knew the kids were not super spreaders. When it comes to what's happening at APS, we're seeing this there and at other public schools in Metro Atlanta. We're seeing them implement the learnings, the application of the science of reading. We know what works because of intense study. And what I know about it is how they studied ways to teach dyslexic kids to read. And one thing that we have seen here in this country is when I was growing up, when you were growing up, dyslexic kids were not. They were not
in. Yeah, they weren't factored in. You never heard. Yeah, didn't hear about it.
They were not diagnosed. And what we know today is that 1 in 5 kids are probably dyslexic. Think about it. As the Atlanta Speech School's head, Comer Yates, says, before Gutenberg invented the printing press, there was no evolutionary human need to read. So we are not programmed evolutionarily. So it makes sense that 1 out of 5 of us have dyslexia. So the science of reading is being implemented not just for dyslexic kids, but for all kids. And when it's done, we are seeing the gaps between socioeconomic classes, between racial classes that have been long-standing begin to collapse. Look at the blackest state in the nation, Mississippi, with more than 40% black. It has always been like 49th, 50th in any educational ranking. They did the science of reading stuff a decade ago, and they have shot up through the rankings. That will have tremendous potential and opportunity for the whole state as these kids have the skills they need to learn and to grow and to be successful and to be wealthy in their home state. That's fantastic. We can do that in Atlanta. We see it happening in the city of Marietta schools as well, where one of the school board members really fought hard to implement this science of reading stuff. And it includes like reading group in the morning, intense reading education in small numbers. It's expensive, man. None of this is cheap. But by God, we're going to keep kids out of prison in the future. We are going to make sure that they can read and write and then learn to read so that they can read to learn. I'm very passionate about this issue. It is the number one way that we get poor Americans out of poverty.
This latest accolade is major. Atlanta Public Schools was the only large urban school system in the United States that showed significant improvement in fourth grade math and reading scores on the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress. So kudos, and we applaud Atlanta Public Schools for that.
And real quick, Lisa, this is when we shout out our good friend Hector Jimenez, who listens to this show.
Hey, Hector.
Just for our listeners to know, we have probably a few loyal listeners. Most of them, Lisa, they give good responses to what we have to say. And then we have those one or two people who decide to engage and send their complaints to the show. But shout out to Hector, who always goes on Twitter and shouts out me and B-Rob, depending on who he's feeling that week. But he's a school teacher as well, and appreciate him and all the other teachers around the state of Georgia.
He texted me this weekend to say he was going to the UGA-Mizzou game in Athens. I told him, yeah, well...
He texted you. Y'all have a cell phone kind of text conversation.
It was Twitter DM.
Twitter.
I don't want to say anybody's sliding into my DMs. That sends the wrong signal.
Let's get on and talk about Senator Ossoff. I saw an article, and they pick the worst pictures for these types of articles, and he's looking all
that was your takeaway from this.
Yeah, I'm like, come on now, that's the worst picture you can pick in the headline. Ossoff losing Jewish support. And comparing him, to like you mentioned earlier in the week, Brian, if the race were held today and Governor Kemp jumped in, Governor Kemp probably would beat Ossoff. So I don't know. What is your takeaway from that, both of you? Tharon, I'll start with you. What was your takeaway from that article?
We talked about this probably about a month ago. And just for our listeners to know, there was a very controversial Senate vote that happened, and Senator Ossoff actually had to make a very tough vote about what was the U.S.'s role when it came to Israel. And we all remember the horrific day on October 7th, 2023, when Israel was attacked, and they were innocent lives, Jewish lives that were lost. And ever since then, you've seen this unwavering support from Jewish members saying, hey, we want to protect ourselves, and that if you're not with us moving forward in the right direction, this is dealing with Hamas and dealing with the war in Gaza. This is before the ceasefire was done, before President Biden was on his way out. And so the senator, was very specific to the Jewish community. He had a press conference, Lisa, and you remember he reminded us of all the things that he's done while he's been a U.S. senator, and even before he was a U.S. senator, commitment to Israel, commitment to being a pro-Israel Jewish member of the U.S. Senate. And he explained his vote. Well, we saw instantly that there were some Jewish members in Georgia and other places who came out and express some outrage. And I think that's a proper word to use, some disappointment.
Yep. I can back that up. Yes.
Yeah. And in the senator's office, apparently, was fielding calls and having meetings and conversations and talking to most of these individuals who had some disappointment with this vote. And some of them, I think that they probably have talked to by now. But the thing that's interesting about this New York Times article is that it highlights people, and they're coming out, and some of them are quoted. They're saying that not only do they disapprove with his one vote, they are very concerned about him being reelected as U.S. Senator. And some of them go on to suggest that they will support a Republican governor, Governor Brian Kemp, to run against him. So this is serious. And it's very serious because Senator Ossoff is been very, very supportive of the Jewish community. There are some that feels that he can be more supportive. There are some that feel that he can actually be more available to them. But if you talk to the senator, and I've known him for a long time, I can tell you that he was, one of the first Jewish friends that I would go and talk to when we talk about how we together can strengthen the Black Jewish coalition that exists in Atlanta. That is something that's been around for a long time. So, Lisa, the job of this podcast is to talk about the political implications of this. The Jewish community has been a big, big part of the Democratic base for a very, very, very long time. And I think many of them, the women and men, will continue to be supportive of our democratic principles and cause. We did see some Jewish members not like the way that certain elected officials, Republicans and Democrats, that handled the horrific day, October 7th. They were basically saying, hey, you got to pick a side. But I think that this New York Times article reveals that there's still some unhappiness amongst some Jewish members. And I know that the senator takes it very seriously. They are actually trying to encourage him to either be primary or to support a Republican governor against him, and to not only support them, but to raise money for them that is something I think that the senator will have time to really try to make up as much as he can, rebuilding those relationships and get in front of these active Jewish members of the Jewish community and explain to them why he is the best senator for them personally and politically to lead them in Georgia. But it is concerning. He has time. The election is not until 2026. But some of those names that I saw in this article, Lisa, some of these folks I know, and they're heavyweights. They're just, and I'm not saying that one Jewish member is more heavyweight than the other, but some of these people are folks who I know will put their money where their mouth is, who are very passionate about the state of Israel and how do they continue to defend themselves and making sure that politicians are voting in a way that they approve. And they want access. They want answers. And so it's concerning, but I do think the senator now has a unique opportunity to respond and rebuild some of those relationships.
First of all, let me say happy birthday to Senator Ossoff. It was over the weekend, I just read today. So I hope he had a great birthday at home. One thing I found interesting about this is the location of the story. It's in the New York Times, a place that's more likely than not to talk about, problems with the Republicans than a problem that a Democrat is facing. So for this to rise to that level shows the force and the power of the people trying to get this narrative out there, to go and get this New York Times reporter to do what is essentially a local story with national implications. The storyline that we're seeing is one that was utterly avoidable for Senator Ossoff, someone that I have often said here over these last 4 years, and really going back to 2017. We had a political breakfast back then when he ran for Congress. I was like, how in the world did this guy come out of nowhere? He looks like he's 17 years old and he's raising $50 million, $60 million, whatever it is. He's got great political acumen, and I do not understand why he would vote on this issue the way that he did. There was no upside for him and a lot of downside for him to do it. It was presented at the time as almost a symbolic vote, something that wasn't going to make a difference anyway. So why fall on that sword, if it wasn't really going to make a difference at the end of the day? He opened himself up to this attack. Republicans can now paint him as on the wrong side of Israel. And he can sit here and explain till he's blue in the face. When you're explaining, you're losing. You can't go and say, hey, I voted for all this funding for Israel. Hey, I did this against Hamas. This one thing will define the issue for him in politics. Before we got on the show today, I was dealing with a political client, and someone on the thread said, I think we need a more nuanced answer. And I said, nuance is deadly in politics. One thing that makes political breakfast great is that Tharon and I speak in nuance all the time. It would probably be deadly for us if either of us ever ran for office, because we've shown both sides of the coin, as part of this show. But when you do that in politics, you are often seen or portrayed as on the wrong side of the issue. I think that's what's happened here. I think it was a political mistake by Jon Ossoff. And one thing interesting in that article that would have been different in the Wall Street Journal if they had done the story was they took pains to go to these donors who asked Governor Kemp to run against Ossoff. These are Jewish donors asking a Republican to run. They took pains to point that these people don't really like Republican politics, particularly under Trump, that maybe they would have, gone over to the Republicans more, en masse during the Bush years, for example. The fact is, we are seeing a little bit of a breakup of that Jewish coalition as far as it has been an ironclad part of the Democratic coalition for a long time. There's always been Jewish Republicans too, but it's a minority. I think you'll see more and more begin to drift over a little bit based on these issues, because American Jewish people have never been more scared than they are now. They are scared of what could happen to Israel. They are scared of anti-Semitism and violence they've always been scared of anti-Semitism from the far right. And what that New York Times story said is that today they are increasingly scared about anti-Semitism from the far left. And that will have political implications in this state.
So is this perceived trouble with Ossoff, is that what's fueling the support for Kemp at this point, and what people would think pushed Kemp over the top in this race?
This is a hard one. I've talked to a couple individuals, a couple men who are quoted in the New York Times articles, are friends of mine, and the things that they said publicly are things that they've said to me privately. There's also this one quote in there where it talks about feeling like he's out of touch. And I know he's not out of touch, to Brian's point, right? Like, we know Senator Ossoff, when he takes the microphone, and I'll tell you, somebody who works with him, right, in his office, you get a yes or no from Jon Ossoff, right? It's, either, hey, he'll tell me, hey, brother, I'm with you. Hey, Tharon, good to see you. How's the family? I can't be with you on this one. So he's not a waffling kind of guy. I mean, like, he studies, he's methodical, he's very passionate about what he believes in. But on this one, I think that this article, Lisa, presents a tremendous opportunity for Jon Ossoff to really spend more time, not just with the folks who were quoted in this article being against his political ambition, right, being reelected, but to also grow a base of folks and find out who are these individuals that can speak up in his defense. One of the things I tell my clients too in running, and we do it on this political podcast, folks sometimes say to me, hey, Tharon, it's not also about you going on the offense, and B-Rob knows this. It's when B-Rob says something about somebody that I can actually defend this person, and vice versa, right? And we defend them because we genuinely believe that they are, that they are being wrongfully attacked or wrongfully portrayed to the public. So I think that what I'm waiting to see, Lisa, is where are the members of the Jewish community that will speak up on behalf of the senator, because I know that he has been a supporter. However, to Brian's point, this vote made him appear to not be pro-Israel. And when I tell you, the friends that I know, even when they talk to me as a black man who supports Israel, who's been there, who I worked for John Lewis, who always talked about the Black Jewish Coalition that Brian referred to in Atlanta. Many of these folks listen to the podcast. I'm being very careful about how I don't misconstrue or misportray them. There's outrage. I mean, and when you go on the record and you say that you're going to raise money and go against an incumbent U.S. senator in Georgia who earned the right to serve this state and ran a damn good campaign and well-financed, well-disciplined, and quite frankly, Lisa is doing a damn good job in the U.S. Senate, right? For you to say we want somebody else and that person should be Republican Governor Brian Kemp, that is a bold statement, but there's time. And so what's interesting is that how does Governor Kemp play this, Lisa? Because as Brian reminded us, not all Jewish folks are pro-Democrat, right? I met a lot of Republican Jewish people, but the majority of them are usually supportive of the Democratic platform. And so I'm afraid now that this is a key constituency block that has been a part not only of giving us money as Democrats, but also voting and being supportive of the black community's plight. But there's also this issue that you have this U.S. senator now who is getting attacked, quote unquote, by his own people. And so I don't want that to reflect that there's how all people feel. If I was Jon Ossoff and give him some advice, stay defiant, be more available, be more communicative, but at the same time, have your friends who know you best, who are Jewish members of the community, remind these folks who are speaking out against you of why they support you. And I just think that he's got to figure out a way to deal with this issue. I wouldn't get so much focus on them wanting to run over to Brian Kemp, even though Governor Kemp has some Jewish support. But he's just got to rekindle and be accessible to a lot of these members who are discouraged right now.
Yeah. Let me add a layer of reality to this. To answer your original question, Lisa, about is this fueling Brian Kemp's a push toward him running for Senate? No, I don't think it is. It would be a net positive for Kemp or any other Republican that was acceptable by the Jewish donor class. It would be a net positive and a net negative for Ossoff. But neither side in the general election is going to have trouble raising money in this race. And this is going to be one that will be important for the size of the U.S. Senate majority. We're going to have a few $100 million spent here, no matter who the nominees are. I do think it has long-term implications for the Democratic Party if some of these big Democratic Jewish donors begin to become more likely to support Republicans. But I am watching Jon Ossoff, and I'm watching the strategy. And with Trump in office, what we are seeing him do is post up on Trump every single day. I'm on there. I get their press releases so I can kind of keep track of what they're talking about. And every day it's some quote attacking Donald Trump and what he is doing. So he is sending a signal to anybody in the Democratic coalition who may not like him on any given issue, most notably the Israel issue. And he's saying, hey, we may have a little bit of daylight here, but hey, we all hate Donald Trump, right? I'm with you on the thing that is this other thing that is really huge to you. And he's reminding us of that. We have not seen Ossoff be this political in the last 4 years during the Biden administration, right? We've seen him be, have a much lower profile. He's now in cycle. He's raising his profile, and he's posting up on Trump, which is what you do when you're a Democratic incumbent or challenger for that matter. As Tharon often hears me say when we are doing joint public speaking events, the Republican Party revolves around Trump. The problem for the Democrats is that they revolve around Trump, and so I still think that's true today and probably will be true for as long as Donald Trump is president. So Ossoff is going by the playbook.
All right. Well, you've heard it here on Political Breakfast, and as Hector says, Tharon and Brian are always right. So you heard it, heard it right here. Heard it right here.